Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, Season 4, Episode 2. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest on this episode is Greg Corin, President and CEO at Novagevity, an ag tech entrepreneur, 20-year history of breakthrough thinking, now focused on the intersection of health, tech, and agriculture. It's a fascinating discussion.
Oh, yeah.
As I say in the interview, I couldn't have imagined a better start to the year for a whole bunch of reasons. Now, did you know Greg, or you'd met Greg before? You're both Haligonians or in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, I mean, he's well known. Greg is well known. Everyone knows Greg. And so I was so happy that he accepted our invitation to come on our podcast. In fact, I think we should have actually invited him like way earlier, not in season 4, but he's a leader. He's a visionary. He's the brains behind Good Leaf, True Leaf, which has now become a really exciting business with facilities in Montreal, Guelph, and Calgary. So he's just great. So I'm happy that we've had a chance to chat with him.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And speaking of Good Leaf or True Leaf, the brand's Good Leaf. I mean, that's we interviewed the president in season 3 or season 2, and that product's in my kitchen now, in my mother's kitchen every single day. So I get a lot out of this podcast, but one of the things is these ideas, and he mentions a product that I'm going to go buy tomorrow. So
that's right. Novagevity, I think, is going to be a new supplier of yours now. and frankly, I think I'm going to start buying some of that product too.
All right. Well, let's get to the news and to the podcast. Some of what we'll talk about this episode is kind of a touch base of where we were before. So let's start with, I don't know, what do we call it? The cost of grocery meetings.
Cost of living.
Cost of living.
The cost of living summit.
Cost of Living Summit. So we had, it feels to me like the second Ghostbuster movie. A similar script, not so much excitement. Some of the big actors too busy to show up or missing. Were you involved in this second round of meetings? Just for the listener, this is where the grocers had their day, the 5 top grocers in the country. Yep. And then the next one was to be bringing in, and it's a big amorphous group. I don't know. It's one thing to say the top 5 grocers, another thing to say the top 5 grocery suppliers. That's a weird list. But tell us what you know of it, or how you're involved, and are we expecting some turkey discounts and pumpkin discounts for Halloween to hit the deadline? Anyway,
who knows? Yeah,
so many questions. But tell us what you know.
Yeah, so I mean, last year I was in Ottawa, and I did brief the minister, and I did actually emphasize the fact that perhaps he needs to talk to manufacturers, which he's doing. I'm not involved in those talks at all, and frankly, I would have been surprised if I would have been involved. I know Michael Graydon himself, who's been on our podcast before, was there in Ottawa, and I was happy
speaking
about
on
that.
behalf. And so for the listeners who don't know, Michael represents the association that represents manufacturers in this country, just like Dan Briesbaugh represents. As an association that represents
retailers,
grocers.
that's right.
Yeah.
And so Deanne was actually...
Wait a minute. Well, why would you be surprised that you wouldn't be there? Because it's the same issue, but you're as much an expert on grocery as you are the people who supply the grocery, no?
I was a bit surprised because RCC was not invited to the Big 5 meeting, but Michael Graydon was invited at the manufacturing meeting. So I was a little bit surprised, to be honest. I think RCC should have been there because they do represent the industry as a whole. But anyways,
I can see why Michael would be there, Michael Graydon, because there's thousands, literally, of suppliers, and he represents them all, where the Big 5 were all there. So I kind of get it a little bit. I don't know why not. But anyway, that's how it kind of makes sense in my head a little bit.
But I mean, last week, I think the Big 5 was played into this photo op. I think that's really what it was all about, really. The minister wanted the photo op, and he got it. But then the Indian affair actually took over, and it overshadowed everything else. And of course, we now know with what happened on Friday last week in Parliament, it overshadowed what was going on in Ottawa on Monday and Tuesday. But still, meetings occurred. They have until next week to present a plan. My guess is that there's not going to be like windfall taxes or any sort of policies or measures to set prices in certain ways. I'd be very shocked. I hope I'm right. I'd be shocked. I think that at the end of the day, they'll be focusing on quick wins, low-hanging fruits that actually are quite visible, populous. Like the shrinkflation issue, I think is a big one. It would be an easy one to do, to follow Carrefour's footstep. I know that the minister is inspired by what is going on at Carrefour, and what they did basically was to target 26 products which have been shrinkflated last year, and they're actually shaming suppliers, which I don't think is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, what is that? I agree. What did you describe it as in our last episode? That the minister had a bit of a stick if he was not happy with the outcome of the meetings of the proposals. And, I'm not sure what it accomplishes putting up signs in grocery stores saying you're not getting great value.
But it's visible. It's visible. People will see it. They will see action. Remember, they're looking for quick action, things that are easy to implement. Bringing down prices is not an easy thing to do. I mean, grocers are trying to offer people a good deal. They can't because, I don't know, Ukraine, COVID, supply chains, climate change. I mean, there are a lot of things that you just can't control. I mean, this is a worldwide problem. Canada still has one of the lowest food inflation rates in the world. But the Canadian government has committed itself to do something about inflation. So they have to do something. And even though signs at the grocery store won't make much of a difference, it will probably make a difference to a lot of voters because they'll see, there you go, Ottawa did something about shrinkflation. Yeah. I think that's the game here. It's all about artifacts, and not much about actually trying to influence prices.
It's interesting, as you say, the political news cycle unusually distorted in the past couple of weeks, was just bad luck. Oh my God. Bad luck for the minister and bad luck for us, for a whole variety of reasons.
I mean, I feel bad for Mr. Champagne, to be honest, because he was looking for, some noise, some photo ops, and I mean, in 1 week, you had two major events affecting Parliament.
Suddenly they're back on their heels. But again, it's funny. I keep saying this well beyond the scope, but it's still of this podcast, but it still influences what you and I talk about. Well, let's hope that there's something substantive come from him. He seems like, as a minister, a substantive minister. Like he's you met and work with him. He seems like
But don't forget about the shrinkflation issue. It's not just about signs and shaming people. It's also about private labels. Let's talk about private labels. Private labels have been shrinkflated too, and the snack tax. Come on.
Talk about the snack tax. Like
the government should do its part. Right now, you have so many products. They've shrunk so much. They're now becoming snacks, and snacks are taxable at retail. You have ice creams, granola bars. There are 25 different products just this year. Their quantities have been reduced so much. They're now snacks, and snacks are taxed.
A snack. Oh yeah, we had that on in season 3. What was it? Ice cream that got double dinged, right? That it got snack.
And people don't see that. They don't see that. That money goes. They don't go to grocers. They go to the government. Let's have a conversation about that. So if Ottawa is serious at committing in doing something about shrinkflation, they should look at fiscal policies as well.
Well, I mean, there is precedent for it. They did something with GST to spur housing starts.
Exactly.
So there you go. You got something to work with there.
In a nanosecond. All right. They actually got rid of the GST on new builds for rentals overnight. Why not do that for food?
All right, Minister Champagne, if you're listening, there's your idea. Just mark it down. Call us anytime. Just keep listening to the podcast, and you'll get the solutions. Obviously, we're going to be talking more about this, but let's move on to the Bank of Canada last week. A bit of Twitter action back and forth about show your work. They claimed the bank claimed
the money. Show me the money.
0.15% of inflation was due to the carbon tax. You asked them to show your work. It looks like they did. What do you grade their process as? Give it a grade, Professor.
A grade about what? Transparency or about the work?
Let's talk about the work, because I did get back. Well, okay, you can grade whatever you want. You're the professor, but I'm kind of curious about the work. What did you think of it?
I would give it a D minus, to be honest, because for two reasons. One, I think they actually did what they could that would actually be based on logic. And so they basically look at three components of the CPI. So natural gas, heating oil, and gasoline. That's it. They're not looking at other components. And on top of that, they're not looking at how the tax is compounded throughout the supply chain. Because obviously, I mean, look at the food industry. I mean, when farmers pay a tax, when processors pay a tax, when truckers pay a tax, eventually it will impact industrial prices. So the Bank of Canada didn't look at that. And I know why they didn't look at that. It's complicated. So I think what happened is that
isn't that in their job description to figure out complicated things, though?
Lots of PhDs at the Bank of Canada. So I think they basically work.
I know some of them. They're smart people.
I know they are. I would say that they basically work with the data they had. Our lab, we're working on the carbon tax. We know it's complicated. And that's why I asked the question. What's shocking, to be honest, Michael, is that why didn't anyone else ask the same question? Like, seriously, where's media?
The burden of you. They like, well, Sylvain will ask.
I mean, I just asked a simple question, and I got an answer, and I think they knew I was actually going to take the email, the response from Bank of Canada, and put it on Twitter, X.
Yeah, well, listen.
And since this morning, it's been a gone show. Everyone is reacting to the explanation. They're going, "Is that it? That's all it is." Yeah. It's underestimated. Of course, it's underestimated. So I do question why the government actually came out with a coefficient in the first place. Like, why would you do that if really the coefficient itself is a severe underestimation of how the carbon tax is influencing inflation?
Well, listen, we've got the podcast, so maybe we'll invite some folks in the Bank of Canada on and have them.
That's a good idea.
Let's talk about Stats Canada. They put out a new report today, literally. We're talking on Wednesday about the population. Surprise in that report. Now, what wasn't a surprise is how accelerated our population has grown past the 40 million. Yeah. What was a bit of a surprise to me, and I think everyone, was that the thinking was there was a lot of student numbers in there, student visas, but it turns out temporary foreign workers were the prime driver of the temporary resident population. 1.4 million temporary foreign workers, an increase of 64% from last year. We had this discussion the last episode around our qualms around importing cheap non-union labor, since you'll be talking to some union folks today. So what do we make of this? Is that an exclamation point in our discussion, or I guess it's just a better understanding of the numbers, which is good, right?
I think so. Absolutely. What's really interesting, I think, if you look at our population growth, I mean, things are steady. Our population is growing, but look at retail sales. Food retail sales are still dropping. So Stats Canada actually came out with retail sales data last Friday. And if you look at grocery stores, if you look at food retail, it's steadily dropping. People are spending less at the grocery store because of mortgage rates, because of rents. We all know that. So people are more frugal, and the population is growing. So I think the situation, when it comes to nutritional compromise, I actually think the situation is pretty darn bad, given the fact that our population is growing.
Well, you have some numbers from that. The Food Bank's Canada report, nearly 7 million Canadians struggling to put food on the table. Tell me what you read in the report.
Yeah, the report was interesting, a bit subjective, to be honest, because they actually looked at policy, and they looked at when policy changed. They didn't look at the efficacy of policies in general and programs that were set forth. And so that's one thing. But generally speaking, when you look at the assessment of all 10 provinces, I tend to agree. I actually live, according to Food Banks Canada, in the worst province. Nova Scotia got an F.
Really?
An F. And the best grade was given to Quebec. I don't know about that. Like, you had Quebec at B-, and then everyone else was actually, I think there was one C, which was British Columbia, and everyone else were D's. So, but I mean, it's an interesting read, but I think the methodology was not overly sophisticated, to be honest with you. It was really about sending out a message about think about your children, think about how to end poverty, and which is really what the Food Banks of Canada is all about. I mean, that's the whole idea of the lobby group is to actually end poverty as quickly as possible. So I think they did a good job. They actually were out there yesterday advocating for new programs, and but it did actually shame a few provinces, including Nova Scotia.
Now you're on the board. Remind me, you're on the board of
Second Harvest.
Second Harvest. I saw them in the news. Why did I see them in the news? I think Arlene Dickinson is coming on as an advisor or something. Anyway,
an ambassador.
An ambassador.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great. I mean, Lori Nickel. She actually was. She was on our podcast. I think it was 2 years ago. She's dynamite. I mean, she's just amazing, and the leadership that she provides to Second Harvest is second to none. And so I'm really proud to be on the board. And in fact, we have a board meeting tomorrow night, so I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's take a break now for the news. Let's get to our amazing guests. Greg Corin, President and CEO of Novagevity, ag tech entrepreneur. It's a great interview.
Excellent. Well, we have a special guest today joining us. It's Greg Kerwin, President and CEO of Novagevity. I've known Greg for a while, so I've been at Dow for 8 years now, and his name is familiar to a lot of people in the community. He actually started a company you may know, Michael, called Good Leaf, based out of Guelph. We interviewed Good Leaf. I think it was last year. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so
it changed my It changed my mother's life because we started buying Good Leaf microgreens, which solved from that interview, which solved an incredibly gnarly problem. So I have a very soft place in my heart for Good Leaf.
So the brains behind True Leaf / Good Leaf is Greg Kerwin. So I'm so happy to have Greg joining us today. Welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Thank you, Sylvain and Michael, very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here to participate.
So you're a leader in the ag tech world for sure. Your name always bounces around. You're mentioned a lot, but now you're in healthcare, I guess. You're in between agriculture and healthcare. So tell us more about your journey into ag tech in general, and what's your role at Novagevity?
Well, it's a journey that's unconventional, but not. I've been an entrepreneur my whole professional career. I guess this is my fourth decade doing startups. I spent my first 20 in what I call traditional healthcare, medical device company, clinics, and immersed myself in hospitals and hospital design and healthcare design. So I was always very curious and saw, what was good and bad about that. So then I kind of got out of that section of the world because I kind of became quite disgruntled because really you couldn't change anything. I'm driven by social change. I'm driven by economics, but also social change. And in my world back then, I really couldn't affect anything, and that's still the same today with traditional healthcare. So I saw a picture of a vertical farm out of Japan. Oh God, we're going back quite a while now.
That was what 20 years ago or something?
Sylvain, I think I'm going to go at least 15 to 16, and it just stuck with me. And I thought, well, and I didn't think about it as a way to change farming per se. I thought as a way to change healthcare in the sense that, boy, if I could create a model like this in Canada and create nutritious food as close to the population as possible. Even back then, Sylvain and Michael, it wasn't so much save the environment as it was like, holy cow, these can grow medicines. These farms can grow phytochemicals and really, perhaps ingredients. So that it didn't leave my brain. So I got out of everything traditional healthcare. At the time, my mother was very ill with leukemia, and I kind of took some time to hang out with her, but really doubled down on the design of indoor vertical farming. And really it wasn't in Canada. And back then there was maybe one or two other players in the States. So fast forward, That became quite a commitment. And as you probably know, that led me to understand more about ag tech. And it led me to understand the complexity of farming and food. But my whole passion was about why isn't nutrition in mainstream healthcare? And it seems logical, but it's actually illogical in the sense of when you look, and I know you both gentlemen would be close to that. And so for me, it was always like when you looked at a disease, I'm like, okay, every time we talked about primarily a chronic disease, the word diet became in a clinical paper, Sylvain. You as a PhD understand that, but I didn't see it happening. I didn't see the action in society. I didn't see the doctors. I didn't see the nurses. I didn't see the hospitals understanding nutrition. So that led me to create TrueLeaf. Fast forward, McCain Foods, as you know, took a shine to it. They've been kind of trying to figure it out the last few years. I retired. I was quite burnt out actually at the time. I was living in Toronto. I didn't see my family. I think it was time to turn over the reins, and it was the right thing to do.
But that legacy, man, I think is the future. I mean, what you left behind is just amazing. I actually toured the Guelph facility a few months ago.
Did? Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. So
you
impressive.
Know what? We know what, Sylvain. What's not talked about a lot is that was a group of us from Nova Scotia that really worked our tail off. There was 5 of us every day, drove to Truro because our lab was there, and you know what that's like to commute up back and
Bible
forth.
Hill, yeah.
And if you look at the foundation of GoodLeaf, TrueLeaf today, it was what the work we did in Nova Scotia, and it still holds true as they expand into Calgary and Montreal. So I'm very, very proud of what we've accomplished. Not just us, but ACOA was strategic. Back then, Sylvain was the agricultural campus of Nova Scotia. It was NRC IRAP. It was a group of strategic investors that believed in us. And, it's pretty cool when I travel the country and see what GoodLeaf is doing. And so now, it's about realizing that dream of nutrition and healthcare. So I retired for all of 2 months. And so then when you look at...
So you're a great entrepreneur, but you're not very good at one thing.
No. Well, this is the Novagevity, I think, is my 8th or 7th startup. And
is it? Wow.
Yeah. Most have been, I started my first one, Sylvain, when I was 23, and now I'm 57. So there you go. And
so what's the logic behind Novagevity? I mean,
in a long way, it was accumulation of my life experience. So my colleague and co-founder, Dr. Mary Lynch, who's was a pain specialist at the QE, or now Nova Scotia Health, she called me and said, "Greg, I heard you retired. I want to talk to you about an idea." And I said, "Mary, I am kind of just looking forward to maybe taking a break." And my wife and I had visions of traveling. This is just briefly before COVID. So I met with her, and I quickly got it because I sat on food panels at Capital Health, and I was probably the main person responsible for getting rid of the deep fryers at Capital Health, was my kind of claim to fame. But and so Mary was adamant when I met her, and pounding her fist on the table. She just came from seeing a patient, and she just said, "I cannot give my patients any more what they're giving, patients." In this case, it was the incumbent. The incumbent now is Boost and Ensure, and not bad mouthing them, but their ingredients isn't exactly what you would probably want if you were in a state of healing in a hospital. So fast forward, to me, it was a quick light bulb. And the beauty of it is at the time I was entrepreneur in residence at St. Mary's. And so I said to the students, I said, let's, instead of talking about entrepreneurship, let's do it. So we started Novagevity really with a group of students. So it's accumulation of understanding ag tech. It's accumulation of really understanding the needle.
I'm just curious, Greg, sorry to interrupt. At St. Mary's, what students, like from what program?
So my role there at the time, and what's the most fun I've ever had in my life, by the way, because I really, I wasn't really working. I'm involved in a bunch of other startups kind of as an investor advisor, but I had an office at the Entrepreneurship Center, and basically I kept my door open. So and I was there every Wednesday, but the joke inside was I was there also Thursday and Tuesdays because I just loved it. So any student with an entrepreneurial idea would come into my office and we would sit and chat. These kids were from all over the world. And
Wow.
And, I shared with them my own experiences, the mistakes. It's interesting, Sylvain and Michael, to look at and talk to young people today about entrepreneurship, because it is glorified. But with me, they were getting the non-glorified, in the sense that it's not for the faint of heart.
It's glorified at universities, but in the real world, it's the real world.
Well, and Sylvain, it's interesting, if you saw Peter Morier, I think, posted something this week or last week that, entrepreneurship is down in Atlantic, Canada. But yet, Sylvain, at the academic institutions, we're quote unquote teaching it more. And so I find that fascinating. I don't necessarily think you can teach it. I think it's an accumulation of kind of
I agree.
environment and life experience. Yeah. So that's how we kind of landed at Novagevity. Is like, okay, well, let's create a medical nutrition company. Let's take nutrition and try and introduce it to mainstream healthcare to become a tool about disease reversal and avoidance. And I think we've done a darn good job on that today.
And are you selling a service, a widget? If it is a widget, what
the first product is a Tetra Pak of a plant-based, medically formulated, complete meal nutrition drink, non-dairy, non-GMO, non-allergenic, vegan-free, organic. We worked. The beauty of it is that we worked with a couple of the really good folks of nutrition at Nova Scotia Health. We worked with a couple of really good medical specialists, and it was all exploratory because it really wasn't done before. And lo and behold, we initially designed the first shake really to address digestive issues, which you would be shocked to know that that's not a small issue with patients in the country, all ages, whether it's irritable bowel or Crohn's and colitis or et cetera. It's massive. And so we really nailed it. And it was so much fun because none of us came from that background. Fast forward, we won Product of the Year at the Canadian Health Food Association 2 years ago. Not too many people know that, but that was kind of like the validation. And since then, we just exploded coast to coast. We're in, I think, 1,800 stores nationally. We're all in all the majors. We get emails from patients
Wonderful.
every week, Sylvain, telling us how it's changed their life, how it is sustaining their life. And I mean that sincerely and not with arrogance or anything, that whether it's someone's grandfather or whether it's someone's child going through GI issues, it's a game changer. And I must say, when I travel the country now, when I go in and I see Sperry on the shelf and Good Leaf on the shelf, two really disruptive brands, it's kind of cool.
It's a great discussion. What I wanted to do is take a step, not a step back, but a step sideways, and explore the idea of you as an entrepreneur and what's made you serially successful. And we're touching on a little bit of that. We talked to a lot of entrepreneurs. Some are more successful than others in their food ideas. If your office is open and you're giving advice, what are the one or two or three things that you could kind of distill down and say, listen, if you want to be successful in this line of work, and we'll narrow that focus down to agriculture or food or anything, what are those key success factors that really kind of you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I'm always a little nervous giving advice sometimes like that and being prescriptive. Entrepreneurship is such a personal thing. But what I've learned through 4 decades and lots of startups and lots of scar tissue is a couple of key things. And one thing that I think I'm not good at a lot, but one thing I think I tend to be okay at is business design. So what I do is I identify an opportunity. And so I've had the luxury of going into any industry and doing okay. I'm not into software. I'm not a software person, as you probably realized at the start of the show. But there's a couple of key fundamentals. And if you look at Good Leaf, why it's thriving is we designed it to be fundamentally sound. And I know that sounds simple, but yet we didn't allow ourselves to be intoxicated by what the Americans were doing with AI and machine learning. And at the end of the day, we had something in our office in Truro that we talked about every day, that when we designed Guelph, Sylvain, it was, we got to grow it, we got to pack it, and we got to ship it, and we got to sell it. And I know that seems elementary, but it leads me to
that's the business.
That's the business. And you got to be just, it's the blocking and tackling, I call it. And But the one thing that I'm really consistently drive home to anybody is simplicity. And I'm a classic ADHD guy, by the way. I mean, if you went under the definition in the dictionary, you'd see a picture of my ugly mug there. But it's true. So the most profound book that I've ever, and I only recommend one book to people, and it's called Simplicity. It was by a professor at the Rhode Island School of Art and Design. But if you think about it in design thinking for businesses and products and brand, it applies to no matter what you do, no matter what product or startup you're doing. If you root yourself in simplicity, you'll find success. But really, it's about business design. We've created a way to identify an opportunity, to create a prototype, to test it, to calibrate, and launch. And that's what we did with Goodleaf, and that's what we're doing with Novagevity. But the last big piece that applies to anything I've ever done is perseverance. I'm just stubborn enough to just not quit.
Let me follow one thread on that a little bit, because you talk about business design, and I think maybe it's a culture or the thinking around, minimum viable product, the MVP approach, the move fast and break things. It doesn't sound like you sound like you iterate, but iterate quickly. But, what are your thoughts on that kind of idea that let's just get it half-assed done and then figure it out from there?
Michael, I struggle with a lot of the philosophies today in entrepreneurship and what's the advice given by the accelerators and the incubators. And, everybody asks you for an MVP, and I think you have to, it's not too much different than a prototype, but
sure.
It's your ability to test and iterate and take that information and recalibrate. That then moves you beyond the realm of a minimal viable product. And that is I think the key secret to success is how you go about that. How do you finance it? Don't get over your skis. And what I mean by that is too many people try to go from A to W without going from A to B to C. And I think if you look, and I think that's Sylvain, Michael, that's our maritime culture too, right? And sometimes our maritime culture serves us well. I know it's often criticized because we don't think big and blah, blah, and that's true. But our conservative nature of Goodleaf and Trueleaf is why we're at today, and the same for Novagevity. So minimal viable product, yeah, but again, entrepreneurship and designing businesses is unique. It's not a one size fits all. And I get concerned when we get too prescriptive with that and not allow yourselves to look to the right, look to the left. You know what I mean? You can get too tunneled, and then when you get too tunneled, I think is when you can fail.
Interesting. Let's take a different tact. Let's talk about sustainability. You mentioned a couple of key factors that are driving you in the development of your product, health and let's talk about sustainability and its role and how you think about, certainly in Goodleaf and Trueleaf, there's a big element to that. But how does it on a day-to-day basis fuel your thinking?
Yeah. I think my version of sustainability might be quite different than what people are used to. Yes, obviously with Trueleaf, that's now a sustainable model of growing food and distributing it, and friendly to the environment. And with Novagevity, we're using really novel ingredients, for our hemp protein that's sustainable. We're very focused on clean ingredients. We use algae oil for omega-3, sustainably grown, Nova Scotia company, by the way. But my interest in Goodleaf and Novagevity is sustainability of healthcare. And there's no doubt in my mind, and I've been speaking to this for 20 years. And if you go back and, there's lectures and talks I've given about the collapse of healthcare. And I don't think people realize that we are in a state of collapse. And so for me, my motivation, look, my mother was a nurse. She impacted me more than anybody in my life. And she was always about good eating, health, and being longevity. But when I looked at the health system, I said, if we don't do something, this is very dire. Well, I think it's very dire right now. And COVID kind of peeled the veil back and so I don't think the general public realizes that we are in a really bad state here. And so for me, it was like, well, the best way to sustain human health in a healthcare system is nutrition. Seriously. I mean, yes, sleep, yes, exercise, yes, don't drink too much and smoke and yes. But if we don't sustain our health systems, you're already seeing the needle and the damage done. You're seeing never in a point in time in the last 30 years has our health been the worst, our education system's been the worst, the pick your poison, housing, prosperity. I mean, I am deeply worried, and I'm hearing it all the time, that young people are looking and talking to me and going, and I have two daughters, the age of 23 and 25. One of them's, in medical school. And I'm worried about their ability to live here. So, where does this go back? Well, 99.9%, Sylvain, Michael, of our health system is strictly reactive. It's like you get sick and you get bombarded with tests and treatment, but none of it is about disease reversal and avoidance. So my passion is to marry social innovation and give financial stakeholders an above average return on investment. And if we can do True Leafs, and if we can do Novagevities, where we created with Novagevity a product that healthcare needs more than anything, and obviously I'm biased, but it's accessible, it's affordable, and it's effective and simple. And if we don't do more of that, then we're going to continue down a path of no doctors, excessive wait times. Look, if COVID, I know a number of people that was diagnosed with cancer and could not get treatment. So we all got to just take a good hard look at this, Michael, about sustainability and redefine it and organize investment, organize capital around having a sustainable healthcare system. And with that is Novagevity. With that is True Leaf. And that's my version of sustainability. So that, if our GDP, 60-65%, which is in the coming years, go to healthcare, what's left to spend on our province and society?
So, Greg, how do you see Novagevity grow over time? What's your vision for the company over the next, say, 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, Sylvain, we're hitting, there's a lot of similarities between True Leaf and Novagevity. And, with True Leaf, we'd really disrupted, we created a new way of farming in Canada, which I'm very proud of. Mm-hmm. And
by the way, Greg, do you have an update on what's going on in Montreal and Calgary? Are both facilities built now, or are you keeping up with what's going on with Good Leaf?
Yeah,
it's your child. It's like, well, I'm sure you're curious.
It's funny you say that, Sylvain. When you do a startup, particularly as intense as True Leaf, it is your child, and you hand your child to new parents. And all I could say is you never think they do as good enough job as the original parents. But having said that, I've watched them take over the reins. I think McCain's underestimated the complexity. It's the hardest thing you could possibly imagine. But I understand I'm still, a decent sized shareholder and obviously a cheerleader. Sylvain, Calgary, I believe, is just ready to go. They're commissioning the facility now.
Oh, that's great.
Which is fantastic. I think Montreal is shortly to follow. And then all of a sudden you have, 3 large facilities in Canada that is going to displace an importation. And, I have a package of microgreens in my fridge from Good Leaf. I'm a big fan of the micro broccoli. But, circling back around to your question, Sylvain, Novagevity is deep in the sights of food as medicine. And if you look at food as medicine right now, this is really where we need to spend time. This is where Dalhousie, I think, really needs to look at it, and Nova Scotia Health. So food as medicine is not just like, okay, Michael, go eat a salad. It's becoming a very well-defined initiative and movement in the United States. I was at a food as medicine conference in Chicago in May. And when you start to see the Krogers and the White House and big insurance companies get behind it, and what food as medicine is 2 things. One is the social. So it's whether, irregardless of your income level, if you have diabetes, you are able to participate in a program of meals to help you with your diabetes. The other half is what we're doing, Sylvain, and that's creating novel medical nutrition companies with products so our first product is for digestion. We're about to launch a blockbuster product for glucose and metabolic control. That's very cool. And so all of a sudden, to answer your end game, I think we're going into the United States next year. We've expanded in Canada very fast. We're just closing around the capital now. It's very difficult out there, by the way, for any startups.
That's what we heard. Yeah.
It's brutal. Thankfully, we seem to have something people are interested in. I tip my hat to any entrepreneur right now. It's one thing to start a company and a product. It's another thing to do it during COVID, during inflation, during supply chain. This is just abnormal. So, but we're going into the U.S. next year. Our plan is to raise another very large capital, U.S. based. Our plan is to get a beachhead in Boston, and our plan is to be acquired in 3 to 5 years.
That's cool. 2 last questions. So, how many products do you have currently in your portfolio, and how do you get inspired? Like, how do you get ideas to inspire your new products? Like, what's your day-to-day research life?
You know what? I'm curious, and so in my life, and my mother kind of inspired that, and so I'm very curious. And when I see something I'm curious in, I really get fixated on it. And it started, like as I said earlier, gentlemen, with the picture of a vertical farm out of Japan where the Japanese created it. And so when it came to food as medicine and longevity, I don't, as a typical ADHD person, I've got 100 books and none of them finished. But I scan, and when I get fixated on something, I have about 30 or 40 websites I read every morning. It's a quick scan, but it's information, calibrate. But really fundamentally, when I started a few of my businesses years ago, I didn't realize I was a social entrepreneur. Back in my day, they didn't really use the word entrepreneur. But I've noticed my last few businesses, I'm I want to contribute to society, and I want to give investors an above average return on investment. And when you marry those two, you have significant passion and you have significant results. It's not easy. There's a lot of ways you can take shortcuts, but that's really my inspiration. Ideas come from travel. I love conferences. I love traveling, like you both do, and I've got ideas for a number of other things right now. My wife is trying to keep me settled down a little bit. And, I have a farm here about 10 minutes away in Crowstown.
We'll make sure your wife listens to this podcast.
Please do, and plug a few good words, boys. Honestly, no, but you know what? Look, if you look at Nova Scotia, I want my kids to stay here. I want the young folks to stay here. But we're all going to have to think about how we're going to do this responsibly. I live down here in rural Nova Scotia, and as you can probably appreciate, there's some significant healthcare challenges in rural Nova Scotia, but also economically. Yep. And, that inspires me day to day. And I've been fortunate enough to learn a lot, to, make a little money, to experiment.
It's our premier interview for the season. I couldn't think of a better guest. You're touching on so many issues. Really fascinating. Now, super last question. Where can we go to learn more about the company? Are you a LinkedIn person to get in touch? Where's a quick scan shows your Productsberry is available at many places across the country, but give us some 411 about how to get in touch and keep up with what you're working on.
Yeah. Well, I'm not as you probably noticed, I'm not much of a social media guy. I have a LinkedIn. I know enough to be dangerous. Our products are, through Sobeys, Loblaws, Metro, Lawtons is a great partner.
London Drugs. I see on London Drugs.
And I tip my hat to Lawtons and Sobeys. They took a flyer on us at the very early days because we were local, and I give them a lot of credit for that. LinkedIn is kind of basically where I don't really use it too much, but I kind of keep under the radar, and I find that's probably the best way to go.
I guess we need to apologize in advance then, because you're not going to be under the radar with our listeners, and our listeners are pretty keen on this stuff. So once again, thanks for joining us on the Food Professor podcast. Real treat to hear your story and get to know. And like I said, I couldn't imagine a better first interview to kick off season 4. So thanks again.
Thank you both sincerely.
Thanks, Greg.
Now, I meant to ask you, where are you right now? I'm seeing you're in a hotel room. I was in Vegas last week. Where are you right now?
I'm in Montreal. Unfortunately, I don't go. I'm not an international. I'm not an international seasoned traveler as you are. In fact, actually, I'm saying that. But next week, I'm probably going to be recording from Texas.
Okay.
So, but Texas is not Las Vegas, or it's not Florida, or it's not.
Texas.
You were in Europe. Anyways, I don't travel as much
Texas,
as you do.
by the way. I envy
do you?
Yeah, I love Texas.
Oh,
I love the
there
people.
you go.
I love the food.
I'll have my steak for breakfast in your honor.
Very good.
But I'm in Montreal basically, and in a couple of hours I'll be speaking to a union called the FTQ, and so there are several people interested in AI and robotics. Obviously, we've seen over the summer that there were many labor disputes, and some of them were motivated by the fear of AI.
Sure. The writers' strike that just got resolved.
The writers' strike is certainly one example. So so we'll be talking about. So I'm going to be talking about for about 20 minutes, and there'll be a Q&A with them. It's going to be it's a very private meeting with about 100 people. It's very small.
Yeah, it's not I'm the opposite of that. Next week, Retail Council of Canada is having a retail sustainability conference.
Yes, I saw that.
Grown and grown and grown. I mean, there's going to be 500-600 people there. Galen Weston actually is opening
That's awesome.
The conference. It was great to get Galen on, and then I follow up with a panel interview with the president or CEO of the LCBO, Big Ontario winery, liquor company, very progressive. And
it's a good thing that Galen goes out and talks to people, and I think it'll be good for him. It will be good for his brand, the company. I think that he needs to do those kinds of things, I think, to actually connect with the people in the industry.
Yeah, I actually saw him in Vancouver at a big international event back pre-COVID, and it's just about global sustainability and the environment, right? So that's what he's talking about. And so I've got the CEO from the LCBO and the president's Canadian CEO from Procter & Gamble. So we're talking about leadership and culture more than the kind of day-to-day moving parts. So super looking forward to that. And then I'm off in Vancouver and a bunch of other places. We can talk about that later as I take my keynotes on the road. But listen, let's talk about one of my favorite foods. In fact, I made it last night for my mother.
Not sardines again.
Kraft dinner. I made Kraft dinner. So what I do for my mom, and then
Katie,
what we're talking about, Katie. Now, truth be told, I'm still using the cases of it I bought at the beginning of COVID when I was a little worried about food supply. These giant cases. So, by the way, the best before date was 2021, and it's still delicious. So, enjoying that. But I made some ribs on the smoker, and then I make rib.
Oh my God!
Rib mac and cheese for my mom. So, Katie, getting a refresh.
Can I be your mom? Can I be like?
It's pretty good, actually.
You deliver to Halifax?
Oh, that's a good idea. So Katie's getting a brand refresh or whatever a brand refresh looks like in the CPG world. Look the same to me. I mean, the letters were something different, but what I thought was super interesting about it, and I think this is a bit controversial. I know it's meant as a kind of a lark, but given where restaurants are today fighting for their lives, they're launching cancel coverage, a special fund designed to cover restaurant reservation cancellation fees for the first 500 people who upload their cancellation fee receipt from a booked restaurant dinner. They will get a partial reimbursement, up to $25 from Kraft Dinner. In other words, stay at home, eat Kraft Dinner, don't go to a restaurant. What's that phrase? That seems a little tone deaf to me. Seems fun in concept, but maybe
a little. Yeah, the box itself was one thing, and that particular contest, if you want to call it that way, caught my attention too. I don't know. Like I'm not sure Kraft Heinz scored points here.
Well, they got 50 million views on TikTok, so I'm gonna notch that as a.
Did they? I did not know that.
I'm gonna knock that one as a big win. That's gonna make.
That's a win. That's TikTok. Yeah. So Katie just got its TikTok moment.
I wanted to.
If you get your TikTok moment, you can become president of the United States like tomorrow.
Yeah, I guess I've had 700,000 views on one of my food TikToks. That's as high as I've got. The rest are. I haven't hit a million yet. I wanted to end on a fun note, talk about creativity in the restaurant business. Now, this came to me via social media. It turned out when I did some digging, it wasn't a new thing. It came up early from a restaurant in Toronto early in the pandemic. I thought it was brilliant because I also thought it mirrored something you and I have been advocating for the Restaurant Association to ask the government for. So this restaurant came up with the idea of renaming all of their foods as if they were office supplies. So you didn't order a burger, you ordered a printer. and you didn't order a sandwich, you ordered a pencil sharpener so that you could expense it, right? So you could expense it. And you and I have been saying for years, literally for years, I don't understand why the Restaurant Association doesn't ask the government to go back to 100% write-offs on business dining. Because right now it's 50%. So
easy peasy.
Lo and behold, they've asked for that, and they've asked for some other things. But anyway, so great to see they're taking our advice. There you go.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, sort of.
The check, I'm sure, is in the mail for our consulting fees.
Of course.
That. Anyway, we
Absolutely.
are very happy to come up with any ideas and have any guests that help our friends in the restaurant sector because we love them a lot.
At the end of the day, taxes are bad for the economy. Let's face it.
Well, somebody's got to pay for the roads and healthcare and all that stuff. It's just the right blend of taxes, right? I don't mind paying taxes.
I pay my income tax. I'm glad. I'm happy to pay my income tax. It's great.
I like the GST. I even like the GST, so it's not hidden in the manufacturing costs. If you remember the bad old
right
world.
now, my feeling in the Western world is that we seem to be taxing everything to death. I mean, we're taxing sugar. We're taxing this. We're taxing that. There's talks about taxing meat now. I mean, can we just take a step back here and, assess this a little bit?
Well, it's a very taxing issue. Back to the puns. All right. Well, it was a great episode. And listen, for you who are listening out there, thank you for tuning back in. Our numbers from our first season premiere are fantastic. So welcome back.
Yes, welcome back. It's great.
Thank you for sharing. And please do share with anyone in the grocery, food service, or restaurant industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, keynote speaker, and podcaster. And you are?
And you're a good cook, Michael. Don't forget about that.
Yeah.
Don't forget about that. And I'm his sidekick, the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Well, Sylvain, safe travels back home, and I look forward to speaking with you next week. More great guests to come, and we can't even predict what the next piece of news is going to be. So
exactly.
It'll be fun.
All right. Take care.